Pushing Back the Shadows, support and awareness for mental health. Hello and welcome to episode 30 of the Pushing Back the Shadows podcast. My name's Alex Davis. I'm the founder of Pushing Back the Shadows and the main author behind the blog. Now, you can tell you're off to a good start when you boot up the computer, you do your interacting on Twitter and that, catch up with all your latest notifications and so on and so forth. And then you load your podcast program, you click record, you say hello and welcome, and the entire computer shuts itself down. You get the feeling I'm not supposed to be recording this, but you know, we'll plow on anyway. One of those days. See, I've just had a couple of days off, kind of me time. Had one day where I wasn't so good, and then a couple of days where it was, do you know what, I'm going to take a break. So I went down to my parents, went on my partner had got vouchers for a spa day and she wanted me to come along as well. It's something I've never done, but actually I'd really recommend it. More to come on that later on. But so I had a couple of me days and now cracking back on with the podcast. And today we're going to be looking at depression, my only friend. Now this is kind of the last one in the series that I've been doing about depression. So if you haven't already checked out episodes 26 through to 29, I'd really recommend that you do that. But in the meantime, here is the last part. Now we've talked about how depression is a liar, how it's a comforter, how it is darkness, how it's emptiness. And now we're looking at how it is my only friend. Now, as I've said before, this is strictly done from my own perspective, my own depression. It might be that there are bits that you can relate to. It might be that there aren't bits at all that you can relate to. But this is something where it is, as I say, my perspective. So let's dive in. Why is depression my only friend? In fact, a better question might be, do you ever find in your own struggles that it can feel like depression is your only friend? It's quite easy when you get caught up in mental health issues to feel like no one really cares. And I've written a couple of posts about that, such as the Onus, which talks about how it's important that people don't put the sole onus, the sole responsibility of communication on the person who is struggling. Because really that can be quite detrimental and damaging to that person. But so it can often feel as though really depression is your only friend. It's something that I've gone through quite a few times. It's particularly when I was really struggling, because now I'm not quite as bad. But when I was really struggling, it felt like no one was there. Whereas depression was always there. Every kind of waking moment of the day, you had that black dog nipping at your heels. And I've mentioned the black dog before on video by the World Health Organization. And that in itself is a very good analogy for explaining depression to somebody who's never experienced it. But so that black dog kind of nipping at my heels, and it was always there even when nobody else was, because it never really leaves. I know a lot of people will argue that you can get better, you can recover. And I do believe that you can get better, but experts do say that if you've had depression, then you're more prone to it. I personally believe mine will never go. I think I'm always going to have those good days, always going to have those bad days, and it's going to be that ongoing struggle, whether that's something that's fixed by medication, well, I say fixed, managed by medication, or whether it's more managed by therapy, whatever it happens to be, I still believe it's always going to be there. Now, that's not to say that nobody cared. It's not to say that I didn't have any friends at that point, because I did. There were people who cared. Depression doesn't take away all your friends. It just makes it harder to believe that they are actually your friends. It can alienate people, granted, yeah, I agree with that. It can push people away, because if you isolate yourself and if you say, oh, I can't do, and you don't turn up to things, then yeah, it'll push people away. But there are still people who will stick around. But depression doesn't tell you that. Depression only tells you how alone you really are. So in some ways it has felt like it's my only friend, because it's always there. It never goes away, like I say. It is always there in the back of my mind, even when I'm on a good day or a horrible day. My mum was telling me the other day about this book that I used to read as a child, which was quite apt, really. Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. So even when it's, because I am actually an Alexander, I'm not just an Alex, but even when I'm kind of Alexander on a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day, depression is still there. It doesn't care. You have a good day, you have a bad day, it is there. But there are other reasons why it can feel like my only friend, and we're going to tap into those. So stick with me and I'll get through those reasons for you, but there is a twist at the end. Let's find out. You're listening to Pushing Back the Shadows. So how is it my only friend? In previous episodes I've talked about depression, the darkness, and how it can be that overwhelming, crushing kind of darkness, but also how it's an emptiness, how there's nothing there. And those are both 2 episodes that I'd recommend that you check out. Episodes 28 and 29 respectively. But so it really can feel like there is nothing there, and that can feel very lonely in itself. I mean, cast your mind back to when you were a child. Did you ever have those times when you'd wake up in the night and it would just be pitch black? Potentially you've been camping, maybe, I don't know, staying at a cottage in the countryside, and away from all those street lights and other kind of artificial lights, it can be pitch black. It makes me think of a number of kind of camping trips that I've done, doing the Duke of Edinburgh Awards, for those of you who are UK based, or even just going and staying in a cottage with like the Scouts or something. Because there was this one Scout trip we had, there was no electricity in this cottage, no running water, no toilets. It was kind of, collect your water from the stream, get up, start a fire. If you need the toilet, it's head out into the trees, boys first tree on the left, girls first tree on the right, that sort of thing. It wasn't nearly as bad as it sounds, believe me. But so it can feel a lot like those situations where you're kind of out and about and there's just blackness. And that can feel lonely, that can feel isolating. Because when you're in that darkness, you can't necessarily see your hand in front of your face. This is the kind of physical darkness that I'm talking about here. And you don't know that there's anybody there. I remember the once as a child waking up and I'd actually fallen out of bed and I could not see anything. Again, one of those, couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And it was kind of, crying out for Dad. And Dad comes in with a torch, helps me get back into bed. But do you know the worst part? I felt so isolated. I felt so alone. My brother was in the next bed. We shared a room at that point. And yet I couldn't see him. I didn't even know, well, aside from actually knowing, I wouldn't have known he was there. Because I couldn't see him. But with depression, it's always there to comfort me when I'm lonely. it is there. So I'm never truly alone, am I? Because I've got this nagging voice in the back of my head. And when that voice gets going, it knows me better than anybody else ever knows me. Kind of the same way that I've talked about in episode 27, Depression, the Comforter. It knows me better than anybody else would know me. And that in itself can make it feel like a great friend. Because how many of your friends know you really well? You might have that BFF who will do all these things that you do, like the same kind of things. And as it says in Frozen, yes, I've got a 3-year-old who is Frozen crazy. You know, it's crazy how we finish each other's sandwiches. That's what I was going to say. You know, that kind of feeling. No, I'm not going to sing it. No, I'm not going to do that again, I promise. But it can feel a lot like it's your only friend, it's your best friend, because it knows you so well. And when I say that, it knows exactly what to use against you. It knows what makes you tick, it knows your good moments, your bad moments, and it can use every single one of them against you. And it can be comforting. But really, it's not quite as good as it says, is it? And it isn't. But it can feel like your only friend. It's not necessarily the best of friends, because what friend would say the things that depression says? What kind of friend would do the things depression does? But it can really feel like it's your only friend. It also tells me that I wouldn't be able to cope without it. Have you ever found that? Because it's something that kind of crosses my mind a lot. What would I be without my depression? Where would I go without my depression? I'd have to do X, Y, and Z. I'd have to get used to the idea of I'm not Alex Davis, person with depression. It would turn into Alex Davis, person with experience of depression, and that in itself can be quite hard. It's where our struggle does become our identity. And again, I've written a post about that, kind of identifying identity, and how our struggle is not our identity. But it can certainly feel that way. And that is where depression, almost like the abusive ex-partner can be. It will tell us, oh, you wouldn't be able to manage without me. You wouldn't have anything to hide behind. You'd have to stand on your own 2 feet, wouldn't you? People would see you for what you really are. You wouldn't have the shield of depression that you can kind of sit there and say, oh, no, this is because of my depression. Have you ever experienced that? So in that way, depression can really, really feel like it is your only friend, because it tells you wouldn't be able to manage without it. It tells you that nobody else cares, and it tells you that you are truly alone. But what's the twist? Because I mentioned at the start of this episode, didn't I, that there is a twist coming, but what is that twist? Coming up in just a second. Enable Pushing Back the Shadows to continue supporting people in the mental health community, their friends and their family. By pledging just $1 a month, you could help us to continue supporting people with depression, with anxiety, with bipolar and other mental illnesses. You can also unlock exclusive rewards, behind the scenes, sneak previews of upcoming posts and much, much more. So head over to www.patreon.com/Alex Davis PBTS to find out more. So what's the twist? I've promised you a twist. And do you know what? Here it comes. Depression, my only friend, is a complete lie. Just like I talked about depression, the liar, depression is not my only friend. And even in the darkest moments, there is still that realization there. Even when I was kind of sat on the bathroom floor, cutting myself to ribbons, I knew there were people out there who cared. It doesn't make it any easier. It really doesn't make it any easier knowing that there are people out there. Because part of you wonders how they could ever understand. Part of you wonders why they even bother. And even though you know, and I really do mean that you know there are people out there, it's kind of pushed to the back of your head. Depression clouds your mind. With that overwhelming darkness, it kind of tells you that nobody cares. Even though your logical and rational side of your brain is saying, yeah, there's people who care. There are. It tells you that there aren't. But deep down, despite everything that I've said to you on this episode, and even over the last couple of episodes, I know that it is not true. It is not my identity. It is a liar. It's not as comforting as it would make itself out to be. Yes, it's a darkness. Yes, it's an emptiness, but it is not my only friend. Sitting here right now, I can think of people who are my friends. I can think of people who care. And that does not solve the depression. That does not get rid of the feeling that it's my only friend. But it does reinforce the thought that there is hope. And hope is quite subjective in itself. Sometimes you can see it, sometimes you do have it, sometimes it's a little harder to find. But it's there. So the twist is that even though my depression tells me all of these things, even though I've got my brain working against me, my mind throwing everything that it knows will affect me back at me, I know that it's not true. Now, I can almost hear a few people saying, Alex, what are you on about? Because if you know it's not true, then how come you succumb to these things? How come you, as you just said, you'd sit on the bathroom floor cutting yourself to ribbons? Why would you do things like that if you know people care? And that's kind of the hard part. Just because you know something to be true doesn't necessarily mean that you will remember it. Does it? I mean, it's one of those things that when you've got something in your mind nagging you, telling you that it's not the case, that it's not true, that you are alone, that you're worthless, that you're no good, you start to believe it, even though you know deep down that it's not true. If you hear something often enough, there is a part of you that starts to believe it. And in those moments when the dark cloud is strongest, you forget. And that's kind of part of what it comes down to. You forget what you know. You hear people who do things in kind of a fit of rage or a fit of pique. Normally they wouldn't do things like that, would they? They'd be the kind of people who you wouldn't expect to do things like that. But then when your mind kind of takes over, and that's not used as an excuse, but when your mind kind of takes over, It's amazing what you can do. Not always a good thing, not always a bad thing either. Sometimes it can be quite good. But I know depression is not my only friend. That's just the lie that it tells me. That's all from me for today. I hope that you guys have a good weekend, and hope that you tune in next week when I'll be talking about, for want of a better word, my life's motto. The thing that I tend to live by. So if you want to know one of the things that goes through my head that gets me through each day, and how I can bring a slightly better outlook onto my life, tune in next week. Take care, guys. That's all from me, and I'll catch you next week. You've been listening to Pushing Back the Shadows. To find out more, head over to pushingbacktheshadows.com and hit subscribe to get all of our latest updates straight to your inbox. Alternatively, connect with us on Facebook, which is facebook.com/AlexDavisPBTS, or you can visit us on Twitter at AlexDavisPBTS. Enable Pushing Back the Shadows to continue supporting people in the mental health community, their friends and their family. By pledging just $1 a month, you could help us to continue supporting people with depression, with anxiety, with bipolar and other mental illnesses. You can also unlock exclusive rewards, behind the scenes, sneak previews of upcoming posts and much, much more. So head over to www.patreon.com/AlexDavisPBTS to find out more.